So get this, podcast listeners. A woman punches McDonald's employees. So I'm going to talk about this subject pretty carefully, but also I'm going to be pretty unpolitic about this because I'm going to be frank. So throughout America, there has been this problem, in my opinion, in the black community, and I believe it's cultural. And that is, there are these constant attacks. They're constantly gunning down black on black violence. In Miami Airport, I think we've talked about this before, there have been so many incidences where there have been black on black violence in the airport, and people just fighting. I mean, just outwardly fighting. And sometimes it's two women, and sometimes other times it's been a woman and a guy, and sometimes guys. And then in Chicago, we had, constant shootings, mass shootings, by the way. It's happening in Baltimore. It's happening across the country. And it's typically black on black violence. It's also happening, you've heard Tucker Carlson talk about this. It's also happening in the greater Atlanta area. And that is different because instead of black on black violence, which of course does exist there, this is actually black on white violence, and it's gun violence. They're drive-by shootings. And so why is this happening? So as recently as just a few days ago, a bunch of McDonald's employees who appeared to be predominantly white were attacked by a black patron. And this happened in Ravenna, Ohio. The woman went berserk and became violent Monday morning after a McDonald's manager told her that the McDonald's manager could not mix two slushy flavors together. So she got upset about that. And she started throwing massive punches in their face. I mean, one of the women ended up getting a black eye. I mean, this went on for, I think, 3 minutes before finally the police showed up. And I want to say finally, that's really fast for the police to show up, of course. But I think initially the McDonald's didn't call the police because they just thought this is an event that could easily be made less stressful, that finally the patron would go away and leave and everybody would be happy just by talking it through. And then they realized, a solid minute and a half into this incident, that it wasn't going to go away, that this woman was hell-bent on beating them up because she had been denied the right to have two slushies mixed together into one. So according to the witness who took the video of the fight, all 3.5 minutes, 44-year-old Cherise Cleveland became enraged after McDonald's employees told her they wouldn't mix her slushy flavors. I heard her ask for a slushy with all three flavors mixed into one. Okay, I only thought it was two, but apparently it was three now. The witness, Brian Allen, told WOIO-TV, whereupon the manager informed her that they could not do that, and she became increasingly irritated and combative and decided that she would go behind the counter and fix her own drink. Well, remember, many restaurants are still operating under strict COVID restrictions, and so you can't even go behind a McDonald's counter anyway when you don't have COVID. But imagine going behind the counter and starting to futz with all of the slushy flavors and the food. Obviously, that's not sanitary. You can't do that. So Cherise Cleveland, went behind the counter and punched one of the female employees, on video, by the way. Another female employee just tried to defend her coworker and shouted, "Hey, don't touch my boss. Don't touch her." Well, Cherise, of course, wasn't touching her. She was punching her. At one point, one of the McDonald's employees pinned Cleveland to the ground and repeatedly punched her in the head. So I want to explain what happened there. So at one point, 3 minutes into this incident, Cherise Cleveland, she punched another girl in the face. And finally, they had enough of it because they didn't fight back, by the way. All 3 minutes, they didn't fight back. They just said, "You need to leave. We're sorry we can't accommodate you. We really apologize, but we're not allowed to do it. And here's why." And they explained. They kept trying to walk it through and talk it through. And finally, they just had enough. And so they pinned her to the ground and punched her repeatedly, Cherise Cleveland, that is, in the face because they realized there was no way of stopping Sharice Cleveland from being violent, nonstop violent, and assaulting them, because she spent 3 minutes assaulting them and they did nothing except try to talk it through. So in other words, they did all the right things and finally said, that's it. This is about self-defense now. This woman needs to get arrested. To which point she says, well, fine, you can arrest me. And then the cop walks in, police officer walks in, puts handcuffs on her. And then you could see that the reality had set in, that not only was she being videotaped, but she's now going to be under arrest. So why, podcast listeners, am I talking about this? I'm going to tell you in a minute. First of all, here's the clip.
Hey, get out! Touch me! Are you fucking crazy? Okay, don't touch me! Do not touch me! I'll destroy you! Jolie, let go! You just ripped my face! Go, Jolie! Do not touch my boss! You just punched me in the face! Bitch! Get out! I'll destroy you! Fuck out! Bitch! It's not worth the shot. Stop. Get the fuck out, bitch! No!
So that's the vile language that Sharice Cleveland was using, and the entire time she was right in their face, pushing them, and then eventually punching them. That went on, again, podcast listeners, for 3 minutes, until finally they decided to defend themselves. And about a minute and a half into it, they actually called the police. The police got there very fast. Kudos to the police. And then, of course, it was kind of a no-brainer to arrest her. So why is this happening across America? It's not like this is happening in just one city. It's not just like it's happening in one community. It's happening in many cities across America and even in airports, as I discussed earlier. And it is happening in the Black community, and it's unpolitic. There's a cultural problem. And what is that cultural problem? What is that cultural problem that states that you can go and assault people over something as silly as a slushie? Because in the world that I grew up in, when you're not happy with the service that you're getting and it's not acceptable, you say, you know what? I'm not going to come back to this place anymore. I'm going to go somewhere else. And that's what you do. And then they can decide whether they want to change their policies or not. But there is a cultural problem because there's this constant violence. There's this anger. And where's the anger coming from? It's coming from the left. Because they're the ones that are talking about the fact that you are being oppressed and that there is white privilege. And so by definition, you don't have the same opportunities as everyone else. In the 21st century, give me a break. We know that's not true, but that's what they're being told. And so therefore, what are they doing? They're deciding to get into fights. They're doing drive-by shootings in some places. In other places, they're just killing each other. They're fighting in airports. In this particular case, this is a Black woman who went into a McDonald's. And I think a couple of the McDonald's employees there were Black. The others were white. And she decided to assault the white employees. Maybe it was racial. Maybe it wasn't. I don't know. But it doesn't matter whether it was or it wasn't at this particular point in time. What matters is that there's a cultural problem in the Black community and it's not acceptable. And what I don't hear are the Democrat leaders and Black leaders standing up saying that this needs to stop and that there's a problem in the community and that needs to be fixed. And by fixed, I mean, like we need 2-parent households. We need people actually raised by a father and by a mother. And they need to be raised with discipline, and they need to be taught respect, and they need to be taught that the American dream is real, that the American dream is possible, and that if you work hard, that we live in a meritocracy, that you can actually get ahead, and that you will get ahead. And stop worrying, as my parents always said, stop worrying what your neighbor has and go figure it out yourself. I mean, you know how parents always say that, right? Because it's, well, Johnny has this and I don't have this. And, that's when a parent intervenes right then and there and they tell you, too bad. Johnny's parents gave it to them, but we're going to make you work for it. And it's very clear to me that this kind of guidance, this kind of discipline, and this kind of parental guidance doesn't exist by and large in the black community. Because if it did, we wouldn't be seeing these incidences across the country where life is not valued, where people just don't value the fact that you have these people working really hard at a McDonald's, okay? A thankless job, by the way, but a good job because at least you're getting paid and you're earning money. And she goes there and treats them like they're garbage. And, you know, most people out there, certainly our podcast listeners, what would your parents do to you if you treated someone that way and they witnessed it when you were growing up? What would they do to you? I know what mine would do. But if you don't have a father and a mother in your household, you don't have both parents, and you're just being raised by one grandparent or one parent, and you don't have people really truly involved with your life while you're in school, and you're going to really crummy public schools, government schools that are failing you, and you're really not taught basic morals and basic acceptable norms in society, then you're gonna do what this woman did. You're gonna do what Sharice Cleveland just did in McDonald's, and you're gonna think it's okay because Joe Biden said it's okay. Joe Biden said that the Republicans are trying to take away your right to vote because they're requiring voter ID, or that there's white privilege, and that somehow exists, and that's the reason that you're not getting ahead, not because you're not actually working or trying to improve yourself or improve your education. And there aren't very many podcasts, radio shows, YouTube videos that I have seen or heard that actually are willing to take on this issue. Take on the issue that there is a cultural problem in the black community. It exists, ladies and gentlemen. In my hometown where I grew up in Baltimore, where I don't live anymore for good reason, in Baltimore City, there's a murder after murder after murder. In fact, this morning when I woke up, I think one of the headlines was that there were 6 people shot overnight. And that's the norm. And the local newspapers, the Baltimore Sun and others, they don't even talk about it. And what is it that I want them to talk about? What I want them to talk about is, why is it that almost all of the shooters are black? Why? And why is it that almost all of the victims are black? What is happening? Why can't we talk about this? And I know that there are going to be some that are going to listen to this podcast and they're going to say, racist. Oh, great. Go. Why don't you go there, by the way? Why don't you just go there and call me that right now? Because I dare ask the question that everybody in America wants to ask, who actually has half a brain. And that question is, what is happening in the black community in the United States of America that is causing these things to just get worse? And I want to make clear to the podcast listeners, it's not every single black person in America, okay? We know that. We know that there are so many people in the black community who have gotten up and out, and they value education. They pull their kids out of the public schools and the government schools that are the bad schools and put their children into private schools. They sacrifice, and they've stayed together as a family unit, the mother and the father, and they've done it for the benefit of their family and for their children. But that's the minority. That's a small percentage of the black community, because the vast majority of the black community, some 75%, don't stay married or have children out of wedlock, walk away from the responsibility of raising their children. And what has that wrought? It's wrought the Sharice Clevelands of the world who think it's okay to assault people in the McDonald's because her slushy couldn't be mixed together with 3 flavors. And the world's going to be ending. So I dare you. Have you ever listened to a podcast that's actually willing to talk about this? And I know that Chris, our producer here, he was with us when we brought in Kim Klasick.
Yeah.
And we're going to bring her back in again. And we're going to talk about this issue. Because, Kim and I are friends. And I actually look forward to the time when we can have her back on the podcast. We haven't invited her. It's not like we've invited her and she hasn't come. We just need to do it. And I'll be happy to do that and bring her on. And we're going to talk. We will talk the entire podcast about one issue. And that is, what in the heck is happening in the black community? What is happening in the culture, the black culture, that that is causing this complete mess across America. The fights, the shootings, the poor behavior. And I think it's worth talking about. And I know Kim Klacik, she will hold no parts. I mean, she'll be able to talk about anything